Hello, innovators. I'm Todd Weyandt, and welcome to the Bridging the Gap podcast presented by Graytech Group. You're invited to join our conversation to model the future of construction innovation and the digital transformation adventure of this great industry. My guest today is Frank Gordon. He's the VP of Strategic Development at BuildBlock Building Systems and is a member of VRMCA, Virginia Ready Mix Concrete Association. He is an advocate of sustainable and resilient construction. With over 30 years in the industry, Frank shares his expertise on how insulating concrete forms and ready-mix concrete are shaping the future of durable, energy-efficient buildings. Welcome to the show, Frank.
Well, thank you, Todd. I appreciate being here.
Yeah, looking forward to the conversation. So I like to get started with how you got into this industry to begin with.
Oh, goodness. Have we got enough time? So my background is, from education standpoint, is architecture.
Okay.
I originally studied and got my degree in architecture and practiced for probably the first going on 15 years of my career. About the turn of the millennia, which tells you how old I am, around the turn of the millennia, I went into construction management. I always was kind of that architect that tended to be a little bit more comfortable in the field than I was actually behind a drafting table and a CAD screen. Even though I could design, just fine and have my chops there, I always had a deep interest in how buildings actually got put together. And I can remember early on in my career, there was a contractor that I worked with pretty extensively with one of my clients. He and I struck up a very good, working relationship and even built into later into a friendship. And he was a very seasoned superintendent. And so he looked at me one day after he and I discussed a topic on a detail and we came to some agreement. And he looked at me and said, "Frank, I'm going to turn you into a contractor's architect yet." He said, "Just give me time." And he was right in that I really enjoyed being able to walk away from a job site and a contractor telling me, "Hey, I can build from these drawings. This works." I appreciate the time and detail that you've taken and put into this. Really, my focus has been, a lot of my career has been on making sure what's the product that was coming off of a CAD, drawing and then into a set of paper documents that was handed off to a contractor was something that a contractor could use and was helpful to them. So that being said, I spent a good part of my career in the practice of architecture, but then I've spent probably at least half of my career in construction management. And it was probably about going on, well, I think it was actually 20 years ago this year that I was approached by a lady that I went to church with who said, "Hey, my brother is doing something really interesting with construction that I think you ought to go take a look at." And so, not knowing really what she was talking about, but I was kind of in a phase of my career where I was itching to go out on my own and do some of my own things, not just from the standpoint of design, but also in construction. I visited her brother who was doing a project not too far from where I live here in Knoxville, Tennessee. And his name is Chuck Parks. He's with a company called Parks ICF. And that was the first time I ever actually saw an insulated concrete wall system, insulating concrete forms, or ICF as we call it in the industry. He walked me around the job, showed me how the walls were built, showed me how, how his workflow went. And I just remember walking away from that moment and kind of having one of those, if you've ever had one of those epiphany moments in your career where all of a sudden it seemed like the light bulb went on for you and something just really made sense. Mm-hmm. That day was one of those moments for me. And I remember looking at the guy going, "Why are we not building like this everywhere? Why is this type of construction not more well known and more well adopted, in the construction world?" And since then, it really has been, in a lot of ways, a love affair with me and the ICF industry, and doing everything that I could to promote the use of ICF from the design standpoint, but also be an advocate for the construction of it as well, to the point that I actually got to be a consultant on the first zero energy school that was built in the United States. It was built in Bowling Green, Kentucky. This is going on 15 years ago. And then from that, I wound up, short story long, went to work for the National Ready Mix Concrete Association and really got to spend about 5 years getting to promote the type of construction that I love, and that is ICF construction. Mm-hmm. And then from that, developed a relationship with the executive level at BuildBlock. And it was a little over a year and a half ago that they approached me and they said, "Hey, we would really like to have you on our team if you ever considered making a change." And so here I am today, working for them and helping them further the use of insulated concrete forms, not only in the construction environment, but also helping to educate architects, engineers, developers, owners, whoever honestly will listen about the
Mhm.
advantages of building with ICF.
Yeah. I love that. So you said that the light bulb kind of went off 20 years ago of that epiphany moment. How has the industry evolved in the last 2 decades there?
Well, it's been a pretty drastic change from my perspective. 20 years ago, if I went to someone and wanted to look at using ICF for construction, typically the response I got back was, "Well, we've never built like that before. Concrete is too expensive. We can't build this with too, we just need to stick with either steel or wood." What we have seen over the last decade or so is that the cost of materials has dramatically risen in a lot of cases. And the good thing I can say is that, from the standpoint of the ICF industry and the concrete industry, we've been fairly price point stable. And I think that's been a big advantage for us because it's given us an opportunity to get in front of decision makers like owners and developers to say, here's all the long-term advantages of this, but we understand first cost is, pretty paramount with you. So what if we told you, what used to be probably a 15 to 20% difference in the cost of building with ICF? What if we told you that difference now is between 3 and 5%? In some cases, it's almost a dead even heat. Would you be willing to consider using it and trying it out on a project? And so that's really where I've seen the biggest change has come from. The other thing that has helped us is that with the onset of the model energy code within the building codes, the more stringent requirements for thermal resistance in your exterior envelope, we were already there. We were already meeting and exceeding the code, 25, 30 years ago. And now the code is actually catching up to us as the ICF industry. We're actually seeing the requirements in the building code match what we were already doing in thermal resistance and vapor barriers. It's been a great synergy that we have seen develop over the last probably 10 years or so. And we continue to exceed the code, even with the more stringent codes that you see out there on the market today. We're one of the most energy efficient wall systems you can build with.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, concrete is such I feel like a fundamental material here in modern
Yes.
construction. From your perspective, how does concrete contribute on the sustainability side of things to the building project?
Well, I have some great information on that just because of my time with the NRMCA. So, if you'd asked 20 years ago who was one of the biggest offenders in carbon production in our environment, the cement and concrete industry would be right up there at the top. And that really came from the production of cement. What happened about 10 going on 11 years ago was the concrete industry came together as a whole, especially here in the United States and in parts of Europe, and said, we have to change this. We can't continue to push this message of, we're the best material to build with, but yet when you look at the impact that we have on the environment, the two don't mesh up as being an ideal material of choice. So we've got to change this. So that's when innovation really started to kick in. And so that's when we started seeing things like a lot of SCMs, which are supplementary cementitious materials, pozzolans. A lot of research started being done. Um, so it was just a few years ago that the NRMCA went into agreement with MIT to create what's called the Concrete Sustainability Hub. And that is actually a center for research when it comes to how to make concrete more sustainable. And it actually was also an opportunity for MIT to actually study all the properties of concrete, something that we don't think anybody had really done as in depth as MIT has done it to this point. What we discovered was that through some simple changes, and I call them simple, but they're, when you look at it from the standpoint of how concrete is made, some changes to cement, some changes to the way that the cement was created in the kilns, some of the basic materials. One of the things that was a change in the industry was the onset of what's called Type 1L cement, which is Portland limestone cement. Everybody's probably pretty familiar with what Portland cement is, and that's been the cement that has been used for eons in concrete. Well, Portland limestone cement has a much higher limestone content, which means it doesn't have to be fired as hot. And so just by switching that type of cement out, you were seeing almost a 10% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions just by doing that. Well, the concrete industry didn't stop there. In fact, most of the major cement providers that are in Europe and in the United States really said, we think we can do better. We think we have a shot to really get down to almost carbon neutral. And so there's a lot of them that are now pushing their own types of cement that actually exceed the reductions that we saw with the Type 1L that just really came on in the last 5 or 6 years. And so some of our manufacturers, some of the cement manufacturers that you would recognize some of the names of, I don't want to be unfair to anyone and just mention a few and not mention all, because they're all trying to do innovative ways to find out how they can reduce the concrete and carbon footprint. And so what we are seeing is cements that are coming on the market now that are very close to almost carbon neutral. And the concrete industry actually accepted the AIA challenge to be 50% reduction by 2030 and then completely carbon neutral by 2050. They're already at 50%. Now at 2025, we're already at 50% reduction from where the industry started at. And we feel pretty certain that we'll exceed carbon neutral before 2050. So it's a great story. It's one that we probably don't tell enough, and we should. But the validation really comes from when other people see it. And so about 2 years ago, the World Resource Industry, actually, or World Resource Institute, excuse me, they actually did a study on, okay, what is the true carbon impact of these major industries? And they were looking typically at wood, steel, and concrete. Well, for the longest time, wood and steel had pointed at the concrete industry and said, look at these guys. They're the biggest polluters and carbon producers in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when the numbers came back, everybody was kind of stunned. When you look at the total greenhouse gas emissions globally across the world, the concrete industry is at 8%. The wood industry is at 10% plus, and that can fluctuate just depending on harvesting and the production carbon that goes into going out, clear cutting, hauling, milling, and then hauling again.
Mm-hmm.
That's really where the wood industry has struggled. The steel industry, as of today, is still the highest because of the smelting process is still the highest producer. But from what we're understanding, that even with the wood industry, those two go back and forth, between the two, who's the next largest producer of greenhouse gas emissions. So that they both hover between that 10 and 11%. But the concrete industry has a great story to tell, through innovation, through dedication as an industry as a whole. We have seen tremendous advancements in the technology that's used in producing cement, which of course leads to a much greener concrete. And think about it. Concrete is the only major material out there that's locally sourced. You're not having to ship concrete. You can't ship concrete because of the nature of the material from long distances away.
Be quite
So it's,
difficult.
yeah, quite difficult. There's a lot of additives that you can put in there, but there's not enough that allows you to get it from one continent to another, before it starts setting up. So it's a great story to tell. I mean, when you combine that with the energy efficiency and the storm resilience of an ICF wall system, it's probably, I don't have a problem making this claim. An ICF wall is probably the most sustainable and resilient wall system available out there in the construction market today. And I'll debate that fact with anybody that wants to.
Yeah, well, I want to pick up on that because obviously, concrete is very lasting. It's very durable. It goes through, multiple lifespans and generations. So how does that kind of weigh in on the thought process when it comes to concrete with it being such a durable impact? How's that play into the structure of it?
So I think until recently, there had been a little bit of a struggle to tie the terminology of sustainability to resiliency. The truth is, you really can't make a claim, of sustainability unless resiliency is part of the conversation. It's kind of hard to consider yourself to be sustainable when you have to be rebuilt every time there's a natural disaster that comes through a region.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
We see that in the coastal areas that are hit hard by hurricanic storms. We see that, and we've seen that just in the last few weeks where tornadoes have hit in multiple areas around the country. Just to the west of me here in Nashville, I had a tornado touchdown just a day ago. So it's when you can, number one, protect the people who live in these structures and who work in these structures, when you can protect their belongings, and when they can recover quickly from a natural disaster and get back to operational status quickly. That's truly, in my opinion, where resiliency and sustainability literally dovetail into each other. So it's kind of hard to call yourself sustainable if you have to turn around and rebuild yourself every time after a natural disaster or a storm or even a wildfire come through. So the messaging that we're pushing right now is that there's no other wall system out there. There's no other material out there that can give you protection from wildfires, from tornadoes, and from hurricanes like an ICF wall system can. So really that's tying making sure that people understand the connection between resiliency and sustainability, I think is key. And that's one of the big communication efforts that we're making, not only in the ICF industry, but we're really focusing on it at BuildBlock to make sure people understand you can build this way cost effectively, but also you can look at long-term resiliency, which also is sustainable, because the longer a structure lasts, the better the life cycle of that structure is, and the less carbon impact you're going to have on the community and the culture around you.
Mm-hmm. I think it's a great point to tie sustainability with resiliency, because, I mean, really they're almost synonyms of each other. You can't have one without the other. So I think
Exactly.
that to put it in that context, it makes a ton of sense.
Yep. So it's
So,
a great story that the industry has to tell. Really, a lot of what I do in my job at BuildBlock is just promotion and education. Making sure people understand, look, this is something that's available to you. It's available now, and it's available cost effectively. So if it is all those things, plus it can give you long-term savings as well as short-term economy, why not give it a try?
yeah, for sure. So you brought up the strength and kind of the energy efficiency of ICFs. How do ICF structures really specifically contribute to the disaster resilience, particularly, with the high winds, fires, and even seismic activities for our friends out west?
So we're going to be having a symposium here in May at UCLA, where we've invited different speakers from different parts of the industry, not just those that work directly for BuildBlock, but NRMCA is going to be there. The organization Smart Home America, which deals a lot with insurance within the residential industry. There's a representative that's going to be there from the concrete industry, of course, and then we've also got a builder that builds ICF homes that is out there in the Los Angeles market. So we brought all those people to the table, and we're going to be doing a full day symposium at UCLA talking about here's the advantages of building with ICF. Here's the advantages of why you should be building with ICF. When you look at it from a standpoint of wildfire, an ICF wall provides you a minimum of a 3-hour fire resistance minimum. So I've actually been to areas where wildfires have hit that had ICF structures built. And yes, when the fire gets hot enough, and this is the thing I try to emphasize to everybody, anything can burn if the fire is hot enough and is fueled long enough. But with an ICF wall, a lot of people say, well, what about the EPS foam? For those of you who don't understand how an ICF wall is made, there's 2 layers of foam that are held together by a structural web that you pour concrete down the center of it. That is actually your form. It's very similar to how a cast in place wall is done, except with cast in place walls that have the metal forms, they come back and they pull those metal forms away. Well, with ICF, the form stays in place and it becomes your thermal barrier, becomes your moisture barrier, also becomes the place that you attach finishes because it has a furring system built into the foam. So it's a 5-in-1 step that when your ICF guy walks off the job site, when your ICF contractor is done with what he's doing, you've got your structure in place, you've got your thermal barrier in place, you've got your moisture barrier in place, your sound attenuation is in place. An ICF wall has an STC that exceeds 50. The best that a wood frame wall can do is typically, when built to normal requirements, normal standards in insulation, best it can typically do is low 40s. When you start adding finishes to an ICF wall, we can get close to an STC of 60, which sounds transmission coefficient of 60, which is extremely quiet. To give everybody something to gauge by, an STC of a 55 means you could be on one side of the wall and somebody on the other side could be shouting with a bullhorn exceeding 80 decibels, and you would not hear it on the other side of the wall. That's how quiet an ICF wall is.
Yeah, it's doing a lot of work.
It's doing a lot of work. So, when you talk about a wall system, an exterior envelope system, and that's the other thing that I try to point out to people too, you can't just compare it to a stick frame wall. You can't just compare it to a steel frame structure, because it is truly a system. It's a complete wall system. So when your ICF contractor walks off the job site, you're literally ready for finishes, ready for doors and windows to go in, ready to set a roof on top of it. And that's the other part of it too, especially in low to mid-rise structures. What we see, we can typically cut sometimes as much as 25 to 30% off of a construction schedule by going with ICF because of how fast we're able to install.
Yeah,
So
makes sense.
you know, to circle back around to your question about resiliency and sustainability, the faster you can build, the more resilient you can build, because these walls are rated for up to a 250 mile an hour wind force. That's an EF3 tornado. Okay. We have examples of houses along the coast that survive direct hits from hurricanes. One of the most famous ones that a lot of people would recognize is back in 2018 when Hurricane Michael hit Mexico Beach down in Florida. There was this one white house that actually CNN came in and did a news report on that was built out of ICF. It was actually built by a doctor that lives in Nashville, Tennessee. But that house took a direct hit. Everything completely around the house was completely wiped away off the beach, except for the wood frame home that was built directly behind the ICF home. So not only did it sustain and resist this damage on its own, it also protected the home that was directly behind it because it took the brunt of the storm.
Yeah.
You
That's cool.
you can't pay for advertising like that. I mean, it's just, we have a fantastic story to tell. The biggest, some people ask you, well, what's the thing that keeps you from building more ICF out there? We're always looking for qualified installers. That's one of the biggest pushes we have in the industry, is to get installers qualified to build with ICF. Because it's not something just like you can just go out tomorrow and start building an ICF structure. You have to go through training. You have to be certified, especially when it comes to commercial work, to train. Now, there are a lot of DIYers that will build their own homes with ICF, and you can do that, but there's still a training course you have to go through so that you understand the nuance of the ways these walls get put together. So you have that. The other thing that we battle is just that mentality of, I've never done it this way before. Why would I change? Well, the thing that I always argue with people about is the one constant in this universe is change. There's nothing else that stays the same except change. Change is always moving, it's always rolling, and it's always adapting. And so you've got to be willing to adapt with it, or quite frankly, you're going to get left behind. We all know what's going on economically in our environment right now, especially with the tariffs and, not to get into all the politics of that, but it's affecting material prices globally right now.
Sure. Yeah.
The beauty of the concrete industry is that, other than maybe cement that might be shipped in from Europe or overseas, everything's made right here in the United States. BuildBlock is an American-made company. We manufacture all of our block right here in the United States. So we have an advantage right now, even in this economic climate. We have an advantage right now to provide people the best value possible for a wall that's also going to protect them.
Yeah, I'm curious. I'm going to shift gears a bit based on your experience as an architect. I think one of the knocks on concrete comes in as on the aesthetic side. So,
sure.
As an architect who cares about aesthetics, how do you counter out that, and how do you defend the use of concrete aesthetically?
I have used this one tagline at the close. I do a lot of AIA education. We're a certified AIA provider, and so I do this whenever I do an AIA lunch and learn presentation for learning units. And there's just one line that I always use, and that the only limitation you have with ICF as a designer is your imagination. That's all it comes down to, is your imagination. I can do any finish with an ICF wall that you can do with any other type of construction. There are no limitations there whatsoever. I have yet to run into a finish that I couldn't use with an ICF wall. And when it comes to shapes, think about it. I mean, some of the most complex shapes in the world out there architecturally are made with concrete. So as long as I can form it up, and as long as I can support it while the concrete is curing, I can do any shape or any type. And that's one of the beauties that I see, especially with a lot of ICF schools. What we're seeing, because of that one school that was built in Kentucky that was a zero energy school, we're seeing a lot of municipalities go to building their schools with ICF because they want that energy resiliency. They want that savings, but they also, because a lot of schools now are required to be storm shelters, because of in inclement weather, ICF is the ideal material and the ideal medium for you to be building those storm shelters out of. So we're seeing a lot of storm shelters in schools being built with ICF. Well, because of that, we can do things like long string ribbon or oddball size windows. I mean, we can do just about any type of, exterior configuration or building shape that you can think of. So it's a great material to work with, and it offers you a lot of flexibility when it comes to design.
Yeah. Nice. What do you think is a big misconception that the industry has around ICF?
If it's going to be concrete, it's going to look like a gray, drab, boring cube. Yeah, it's going to look like just a concrete box, and there's nothing further from the truth. You can make it look like anything you want to. As I said, the limitation is your imagination.
Yeah. I love that. Looking forward, is there a particular technology or practice that you're excited about in the coming couple of years in construction?
I'm still kind of very deeply entrenched in wanting to see that we can continue to push the limits of zero energy in the types of structures that we build, not just for schools, homes that can be zero energy, businesses that can be zero energy, anything that we can do to take, that pressure off of our aging, electrical grid in the United States, which, by the way, we haven't made a lot of changes to our electrical grid over the last few decades, and it's really needed. We are seeing some areas where they are starting to upgrade the grid, but we haven't done a lot of that, pushing innovation in the grid. So the burden on the grid continues to grow, and especially as we see more and more of the coal fire plants come offline, as they start to take those and mothball those and take them out of service, the demand for energy continues to grow. There's some great technologies out there, LED lighting packages that have a very, low impact on the grid. Things like geothermal ground source heat pumps. That's a big one that we're starting to see it being adopted from a commercial aspect and not just in homes. So anything that pushes that envelope of how can we be more energy efficient, to me, is something that always excites me. Anytime that we can integrate the use of solar energy into how we power these facilities, to me, that's innovation that we should always be trying to push the limit on. And, I worked for a very short period of time, for about 5 years, at Oak Ridge National Labs and facilities, and I got to work with a group of people who were studying the effectiveness and efficiency of solar panels. At that time, and this was going on 15 years ago, the amount of energy that could actually be harvested from solar energy and then converted to actual usable energy was hovering somewhere between 20 and 30%. Not a great return for the investment they were putting on it. Now we're seeing that number 50 and 60% plus. So the technology has definitely grown up, for lack of a better term, over the last few years, and I expect to continue to see it do nothing but improve.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I mean, I think in construction in general, the last specifically like 5 years have been just this crazy boom on the technology front of getting more tech into this space, but also just the tech getting better that is already here in the space. It's been cool to watch that. So as we start to kind of land the plane here, a couple of rapid fire questions for you.
Sure.
What is the phrase modeling the future? What does that mean and look like to you?
So I think when you have been in the industry for a while, which I can say at this point I have, I think there's a responsibility to the generations coming behind you to set a template for them to work from. It doesn't mean they have to necessarily follow that template, but I think that you have a responsibility to set a good example of, these are the things that work. These are the things that you can consider to be tried and true methods within the industry. But I think we also have a responsibility to encourage innovation. I think we have a responsibility to say, okay, this is the way we've done it, but that doesn't mean we have to do it this way for the rest of, you know, however long we are here as a species on this earth. You know, look for ways to innovate. Don't be scared to question, does this really work, or is there something better out there? So I think to your point and to your question of modeling, I think we have a responsibility as leaders in the industry to say, we know this works, but we also want to hear your thoughts and ideas. So I think we do have a tendency as we get older to get more set in our ways. I think we do have a tendency to rely on the things that we already know instead of pushing ourselves. Even at my advanced age of learning, I think we have a responsibility to say, okay, what is it that technology has brought to the table now that I'm not aware of, that I should be considering when I build that next building, when I design that next structure? What am I missing that could be used to make the world a better place for mankind?
I love that. 'Cause it's so easy to get comfortable with your process and how you do things, that it's easy to slip into the, well, this is the way we've always done it mindset, even though that drives, that phrase drives me crazy as a creative and an innovator. But even for me, it's easy to slip into that mentality of it, and you gotta have to fight against that complacency element, because that's just kind of the natural bent. I think people like the way we've done it and think that that's the best way.
And again, that's human nature. It's human nature to go with what you know. I think that it's okay to do that, but I think we've also got to be willing to say, okay, I know this will work, but what else is out there?
Yeah, be
What
curious.
would turn the tide? Be curious. Yeah, I love the Ted Lasso. If you're a Ted Lasso fan, I love the point where he talks about the Walt Whitman quote where he says, "Don't be judgmental, be curious." Or be curious, don't be judgmental. I think that plays into every facet of our lives.
Yeah,
You know,
for sure.
be curious. Find out. Okay, is there really something to this, or is it not real, or could it be better by what you have to bring to the table? I think we should always be looking to see what our contribution can be.
I like it. That's a good mindset. So on the innovation front, what does innovation mean to you?
And innovation kind of dovetails into what I was just talking about is that with innovation, we've got to look at, I think that when you're, being that I work for a manufacturer now, which is the first time I've ever worked directly for a manufacturer, even though I guess you could argue when I was working for the concrete industry, I was working for manufacturers, but I was doing that purely more from a promotion and educational standpoint. I think always got to be willing to take a step back and look at your process. I think you've always got to be willing to take a step back and say, okay, can I do this better? Can we change this and get a better result? So I don't think, I think it goes back to this whole thing that has happened in this conversation that we've had here of not allowing yourself to get stuck in a rut of doing things always the same way just because it worked before. So why would I want to change? The innovation in and of itself, innovation is a call to take stock of what you've worked on in the past, but also be willing to say, okay, maybe we could, for example, concrete mixes. Maybe if we did something like adding SCMs, supplementary cementitious materials, or if we added a pozzolan, and basically a pozzolan is just an Italian way of saying filler. Maybe if we use ground glass, we've got this whole income stream coming into our landfills of glass left and right that no one really has found a great way to work with yet. What if we could take that glass, ground it up, and then add it to concrete as a filler that doesn't affect the chemical aspect of the concrete, but it helps to fill up some of that volume there, which allows us to reduce our cement content? What would that look like? And so we've actually got some companies out there now, they're working through their scalability issues, but they're trying to figure out ways of how can we redirect that stream of waste that would be going into our landfills, take that, ground it, and then sell it back into the concrete industry as a filler. That way we are definitely creating a product that is being environmentally conscious because it's directing waste away from, a landfill and putting it to use in a material that has the ability to protect the people and the contents that are going to be existing and living in the structures that are built with this material.
Yeah. No, that's really cool. How do people find out more information and connect with you?
They can reach me at BuildBlock. It's F Gordon, FGORDON at buildblock.com. They can also reach me on my office line. It's code 405-212-3144. You can also find me on LinkedIn. So I'm always willing to have conversations about ways that we can help push the envelope together.
Yeah, love it. Well, last question for you, Frank. If I could give you all construction power, you could snap your fingers and innovate one thing in the industry, what would you pick to innovate?
I think I would probably innovate our education.
How so?
I think I would want to provide more education opportunities to our field workers. I think I would want to give them opportunities for upward mobility. And look, there's nothing wrong with being a guy in the field. Some of my best times in my career have been spent in the field looking at construction and helping contractors talk through details and talk through design issues that needed to be resolved. And there's always going to be a place for those guys. But I think what we've got to do is something that we all hear a mantra of today, but it really is a call to action that is to work smarter, not harder. The more that we can find ways to keep our workers safe, but give them opportunities to grow in their knowledge base so that they can be more productive in their own careers, but also can be more valuable to their employers. I think education to me is the big part of innovation that we really need to enhance.
I like it. Frank, thanks so much for taking the time and joining the show today.
Well, Todd, thank you for having us on. Glad we were able to finally connect and, always open to a conversation when it comes to concrete for sure.